During the Halloween season, while we're all having fun with costumes, scary movies, haunted houses, and trick-or-treating, sometimes we can forget that reality is much more terrifying than fiction. The following are 10 true, chilling events that happen on Halloween. 35-year-old Derek Ward struggled with mental illness his whole life, but he was said to be improving in fall of 2014. His mother, Patricia Ward, a beloved professor at Farmingdale State College in New York, had searched everywhere for a psychiatrist who would be understanding and compassionate enough to help her son, and felt that she had finally found the right match. Derek was home alone with her on Halloween, just days before the appointment she had helped him set up, when suddenly, everything went wrong. The effects of being off his medication for 4 days finally took their toll on Derek when he lost control and beheaded Patricia. Assuming they were witnessing a Halloween prank, neighbors weren't suspicious when they saw Derek dragging his mother's body outside and tossing her decapitated head into the street. The tragic incident wasn't discovered until one of the neighbors went to move the head from the center of the street, making the horrific discovery that it was real. By then, Derek had already committed suicide by jumping in front of an oncoming train. Griffin headed to church alone on October 31st, 2010, without any idea about the horrifying scene that he would discover later that day. When he returned later that morning, his stepbrother BJ Lisk happily greeted him. A bit suspicious of his normally brooding stepbrother, Devon headed to the other room to play video games for a while. BJ had a history of behavioral problems following his parents' divorce, which eventually escalated to violent outbursts when his father remarried. There were multiple reports of physical attacks towards his new stepmom and stepbrothers, which eventually led to BJ's father kicking him out of the house. After showing some signs of improvement, his father began welcoming him back for frequent visits, which proved to be a dangerous decision. By 1:30 in the afternoon, Devon was concerned to realize his family hadn't woken up and started their days yet. He had been at his father's house before church and hadn't seen the rest of his family all day. When he went upstairs to wake everyone up, he made a gruesome discovery. BJ had fatally shot his father and Devon's mother in their bed before beating Devon's brother to death with a hammer and fleeing to the family cabin. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but was found dead from self-inflicted injuries in his cell 5 years later. John White was a seemingly trustworthy pastor at his church in Michigan. Most people who knew John had no idea about his criminal record of violent crime, and his obsession with necrophilia was a well-kept secret until 2012. On Halloween night that year, John packed a mallet and zip tie in his bag before visiting his fiance's 24-year-old daughter, Rebecca Gay, who lived alone with her 3-year-old son. Rebecca, who frequently welcomed visits from John, didn't think twice before letting him into her home. Once inside, John violently beat and strangled Rebecca and carried her body out into the woods. As if nothing had happened at all, he then calmly dressed her son in his Halloween costume and drove him to his father's house. John asked the members of his church to pray for his fiance's missing daughter during the day before her body was found. There wasn't enough evidence to convict him of a similar murder he had previously committed in 1994, but this time he received a life sentence and later committed suicide in prison. Serial killer Dave Berkowitz had already been in jail for years by 1971, when a Manhattan couple was found executed in their apartment on Halloween night. It was rumored that Berkowitz was a member of a satanic cult, and he claimed in conversations with his cellmate that the other cult members were planning on committing a murder near Greenwich Village that Halloween. When the story was relayed to authorities, Berkowitz was questioned about his claims. Despite not having contact with this Manhattan couple or any members of the supposed cult since his conviction in 1977, Berkowitz told the police that the couple had video footage of one of his murders, so the cult had targeted them to prevent any further evidence from spreading. He was also able to describe the couple's apartment in startling detail. Their murders remain unsolved to this day. A food festival on Long Island in 1955 seemed like the perfect place for Marilyn Damman to bring her 2 young children on Halloween Day. It was much more common at the time to leave children unattended than it is today, but Marilyn would come to regret leaving 2-year-old Stephen and 7-month-old Pamela alone. She left the 2 with her stroller for about 10 minutes outside of a store while she bought a few items, and when she returned, they had vanished from sight. Searching the area in a panic, Marilyn found Pamela in her stroller unharmed, not too far away, but despite involvement from the Long Island police, Stephen was never found. The Indiana State Fairgrounds Coliseum was the site of a Holiday on Ice show on Halloween night. Hundreds of people would gather inside to watch the skaters' performance each year, but in 1963, the show would turn deadly. Unbeknownst to the attendees, the unventilated room was slowly filling with gas throughout the night. During the skaters' grand finale, the gas finally reached the heated equipment in the food stand and exploded. In the giant blast, 74 people were killed and about 400 others were injured. Halloween night in 1977 went as expected for a young family in Lawton, Oklahoma. 19-month-old Nema Louise Carter was put to bed in her crib as normal, but her parents found the crib empty the next morning. A month went by before Nema was discovered, decomposing in the refrigerator of an abandoned house. A year prior, 3-year-old twins Mary and Tina Carpenter went missing from the same town and were similarly found later in the refrigerator of another abandoned house. Mary had suffocated, but Tina was still alive to tell her story to the police. She claimed that her babysitter, Jacqueline Rubidoux, had lured the two into the house before closing them inside the fridge. Since Tina was so young, the police weren't able to use her testimony in court. Jacqueline had been hired as Nema's babysitter soon before her disappearance in 1977, so with this prior accusation, she was immediately made a suspect. There wasn't enough evidence to convict her at the time, but eventually, Jacqueline was given a life sentence for the murder of Mary Carpenter. She died in prison in 2005 from liver cancer, never admitting to the unsolved murder of Nema Louise Carter. I'm sure we've all heard urban legends about scary Halloween decorations that turned out to actually be real, but in a few instances in recent history, those legends were true. Around Halloween in 2005, a 42-year-old woman in Frederica, Delaware, climbed a tree near a public road and hung herself from a high branch. Even though her body was clearly visible to all the cars driving by, it was almost a full day before police were notified. Passerbys assumed they were driving past a Halloween decoration for hours before finally realizing that it was a real, human body they were seeing hanging from the tree. A normally fun-filled haunted hayride near Chicago would be the site of an unfortunate accident in 1990. One of the teenage employees, Brian Jewell, would scare customers who were riding past by pretending to hang himself at the decorative gallows they had built as part of the attraction. After seeing Brian successfully perform the stunt multiple times, the tractor driver wasn't concerned when he approached the gallows with the next group of the night. It wasn't until Brian didn't perform his usual speech that the driver realized his most recent attempt had failed. If you grew up trick-or-treating, you've probably heard cautionary urban legends about candy that's been poisoned or otherwise tampered with. What you may not know is that one Halloween night in 1971, that legend was true. In hopes of taking advantage of the life insurance policy he had taken out on his 2 children, Father Ronald Clark O'Brien poisoned a small stash of Halloween candy, which he gave to both his son and daughter, as well as 4 other neighborhood children. Only his son Timothy ended up eating the poisoned candy and died shortly after. It didn't take long for authorities to discover the source of the poison and take O'Brien into custody, who was executed 10 years later for his crime. Halloween can bring out the best and the worst of us, so please be safe tonight and have a happy Halloween.